Hi, my name is Albert. Probably many people will now say that they would like to be in my place, that they envy such a life as I have. That's because I live in a spaceship. How it happened, I'll tell you now. I was born into a family of scientists. My parents were terribly smart people, and they met at work during the inspection of one of the spaceships. They were both employees of a very world-famous corporation. Well, I won't divulge its name. In short, the bottom line is that their schedule was unrealistically frenzied, and they spent 24 hours a day there. In general, that's how they met, just working side by side. Well, then they fell in love with each other. Dad was my mom's assistant. After a while, they decided to get married. Even the wedding they did without leaving the house. After a while, my mother got pregnant and still worked until the very last moment. They were so busy, and then she went on maternity leave and gave birth a week later. After that, my mother was forced to stay at home with me and take care of me, and my father also rarely came home and devoted most of his time to work. Over time, this affected their relationship, because it turned out that a year later, Dad had his own assistant with whom they became lovers. My mother was furious when she found out about it, and there was an incredible scandal at home. In his defense, the father could not come up with anything, but only confessed, and that's all. My mother immediately filed for divorce, and she urgently began to look for housing for us. Nothing suitable was found yet. Then my mother decided that she had to go to work, because we need money. She, as one of the best employees, was immediately taken into the former ranks. Only now there was a question about me, because I had to devote all my time to work, and I could not stay alone, and it was also unrealistic to hire a nanny who could look after me for 24 hours. And my mother didn't trust them. By the way, my father quit his job, so my mother could safely visit the workplace. In the end, on the first day, she took me with her, somehow dragging me inside and talking to the management and security. They let her leave me for one day and then look for another way out. We agreed. The whole day for me flew by unnoticed, especially nowhere and nothing I was not allowed. But still, what I saw with my eyes was simply amazing. There were so many people in white uniforms, like my mother, and they all went somewhere all the time, working with huge machines. There were huge rooms, and each of them had its own atmosphere, cosmic. I fell in love with all this at first sight, and I was so excited to become an astronaut in the future. While I was imagining myself as a pilot of such a huge ship, my mother's work was almost over, and it was only in the evening that she noticed that it was already night. Since she still had a lot of unfinished business, my mother suggested that I stay in one of the spaceships for a while, and she took me to it, and then I saw with my own eyes the unfinished ship, but it was so beautiful. My mother made me a blanket inside and asked me to lie down until she was free. Of course, when she was gone, I looked at everything. For a second, I imagined that I was in space and falling in zero gravity. I used to read books about space and had a rough idea of what it was like. Grabbing the seats, I lifted myself up in my arms and froze, imagining that I was flying and that my feet were walking in an empty space. Very conveniently, my mother brought me a snack, and it was unusual, but astronomical in special bags. The food that was there was hermetically sealed. In one of them there was a jam. It was in a tube. This is necessary so that in zero gravity the food was not scattered all over the ship. Otherwise, people there might choke on it, inhale or something. So all the food had to be quickly stuffed into your mouth. The taste was unusual, or rather not familiar, but quite passable. Did you also know that astronauts wear diapers? Isn't it funny? But it is necessary in terms of their work because they can't. We humans on Earth just run to the bathroom at any moment. And oh, by the way, in weightlessness, the people go to the toilet in time. That is hourly, because I do not feel like this. The body is rebuilt and works very differently than in normal life. When my mother came, I was sleeping in a deep sleep in an incomprehensible position. And that's all, because I played there until the last moment. My mother carried me in her arms to another building, where there was her restroom. We decided to spend the night there. It was forbidden, but my mother had too much work to do. In the morning we talked and agreed to stay there for a couple of days on the condition that I would not interfere with anyone or touch anything. I was only too happy to agree, because it was school holidays anyway, so I was all for it. Mom went back to work, and I decided to take a little walk around the building and look around. I tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, but you know, people are so busy there that they don't even look at anything when they walk down the hallways. Their eyes are always directed at some papers, just like my mother. I decided to take advantage of this and quietly ran back and forth, looking at one room, then another. After a couple of hours, I came across an interesting type of office. It was smaller than the others, and there was an exact replica of a spaceship, only slightly resembling a pod and an attraction at the same time. I realized that this thing should be spinning, but how to turn it on, I can't find the button. I climbed in and pretended I was a pilot. Emotions flooded me with a new wave. I even began to talk to imaginary pilots, colleagues, choose a course, and fly above the stars. Suddenly, I heard some knocking, rustling, and was afraid. Damn, I promised my mother not to touch anything and not to go anywhere. I quickly hid inside the thing and kept quiet. I peeked through the crack and saw a man come in. He was pumped up and tall. He was standing up and warming up and putting on some kind of suit. And then he started walking towards my ship. I thought, now I'm really finished. He opened the lid, and I was sitting there. He even screamed a little in surprise, and then calmed down and asked who I was and what I was doing there. I jumped up and tried to run, but the door was closed. I begged him not to tell anyone about me. My uncle came up and asked me more questions, and I even cried a little because of my nerves. I was just really scared. When I calmed down, I told him everything as it was, and he smiled and said that he knew my mother. She's popular here because she's our best scientist and engineer, he said. Then he added that he didn't know she had a son. I shrugged, and he decided to tell me in confidence what the thing I was sitting in was. It turns out that this is something like a centrifuge that turns at an incredible speed to train a person and so that he gets used to living in approximate conditions in space on a ship. Son, life in space is significantly different from life on Earth. We are people who fly there thoroughly train, go through thorough training for a long time, and only then are we allowed to fly. And for this you must have good health, he said, and then he showed the sign language camera, which also stimulated the conditions of living in space. In zero gravity, our body does not weigh anything, you need to get used to it. Some may get seasick, and people are trained to avoid incidents. I realized that such a life is really difficult to prepare for, but I suddenly wanted to be in the place of this uncle. We spent a couple more hours together, and he told me a lot more interesting things. And I didn't even seem to breathe when I listened to him. Then he took me to my mother, who had already searched her son while running around the building. My mother scolded me, but I promised I wouldn't do it again. That uncle interceded, calling my interest quite healthy. When my mother cooled down, I asked if I could become an astronaut in the future, and my mother smiled and said that if I behaved well, studied, and listened to her, everything was possible. People like that uncle you met have strict discipline until you have it, she said, laughing. So we stayed at her job almost without going out, all my summer. It was the most gorgeous vacation of my life. It's a pity that I can't tell my classmates, just share it with you. But now I knew exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. This goal motivates me to study a lot and work on myself, so I believe that in a few years I will be able to get closer to the dream and I will finally touch the stars. Wish me luck, friends.
Now, after reading this story, you will probably think that I am a mutant, or that this does not happen at all. But unfortunately, it is so. My name is Call. I am 20 years old now, and I will probably be 20 years old for many years to come. No, I'm not immortal, but I will definitely live longer than an ordinary person. I don't have a heart, or rather, it's not alive. It's mechanical. I'm a bit of a robot. I was born an ordinary person. My father is a scientist, he is an engineer, and my mother is a housewife. They divorced when I was 14. My father spent almost all day at his job. He had a secret service in the Ministry of Defense. My mother did not approve of his absence, and did not believe that he was working and not walking on the left, cheating on her. When her nerves gave out, she packed her things, wrote a note saying that she was going to her sister's because she couldn't live like this anymore, and left. I was at school at the moment, and when I came, I saw such a gift. It went straight on my birthday. I must have forgotten about it. I was almost mad about it. I could not believe in such a betrayal on her part. I remember sitting in the kitchen and crying because my mother didn't have a sister. I called my dad, and he arrived early. At first, I thought it was a joke too. He was confused and scared. How to live now? How can he cope with a child? All this terrified the both of us. The first thing my father did was call my mother, but she didn't answer. So he said that he would go to the police and report her missing. At that moment, I was already afraid of Dad, or rather his actions. I could see that he was emotional. He was so freaked out that he smashed the glass in the kitchen with his fist. After wrapping his bloody hand, my father grabbed his car keys and barked at me to fasten my seatbelt. It was raining and it was late. Well, then the classic. My father lost control. We got into an accident and crashed into a truck. If I hadn't been strapped in, I would have probably died from a broken spine. But the situation was no less severe. Shards of broken glass pierced my chest and hit my heart. The ambulance arrived. I had a very difficult operation. But the doctors thought that my heart was almost useless. They gave me a couple of months, and I couldn't have lasted much longer. My father blamed and cursed himself for what had happened, saying that he had not kept his wife and ruined his son. Well, then he pulled himself together, and after being discharged from the hospital, he took me to some place. I was very weak and could hardly walk, and he kept dragging me around on a stretcher or in a wheelchair. I remember how I found myself in some basement room. It was cool and a little damp. "This is my lab, son. Your mother left me because of her. In her opinion, I had mistresses, so this is what she is," he said, joking. I barely looked around and saw that there was an unrealistic amount of all sorts of equipment. Did I tell you that my father worked for the Department of Defense? So at that time, my father was the head of a group engaged in developing a new level of project. The state planned to create an invincible army of half cyborgs, half humans. All this was in pilot mode, and of course, top secret. My father told me that now that his son, I, was in the grave with one foot, he decided to go against the laws of nature and revive me with the help of science. "I can't lose you too," he said. There were several other people around, and I was being readied for surgery again. Dad put a mask on my face and I fell asleep. In my dream, I saw my mother. She was crying for some reason and was unhappy. She was on her knees at someone's grave, begging for forgiveness. As I approached, I saw my name on the tombstone. Oh no! I opened my eyes in fright, but I could not speak or scream. The first thing I saw was my father sleeping by the bed. I didn't know what was going on. It was terribly painful to breathe. I tried to remove the oxygen mask from my face, and my father woke up. He approached me, his eyes and face telling me that it was a long time since he had slept or eaten properly. My father calmed me down and told me not to worry about anything. In short, his project was a success, and I was the first person to test it all. And I survived. As I was told later, my heart was replaced with a special artificial prosthesis. This operation is now performed in the world, but mine was slightly different from the others. Since it was a military laboratory, the goals and ideas of the project were aimed at improving the soldiers. My father hid some details, but after the operation, I began to recover faster. My body grew stronger, and I became stronger. Another feature is that I can now live longer than ordinary people, and still not change my appearance. I became a completely different person, not the same as before. Every day when I looked at myself in the mirror, I wondered what would have happened if my mother hadn't run away then. Perhaps I would have had a happier childhood, where there are no endless checks, injections, IVs, ultrasounds, tests, and stitches all over my body. I hated her, and my heart was filled with anger. After all that, my father and I learned to live together. I came to terms with the idea that medical procedures and examinations are part of life, and its image. Only in the movies can a person continue to travel, drink, smoke, and dance until morning after a complex operation. In my case, every extra stress could cause the body to go into shock. This meant that I had to lie down on the couch again for examination. My father quit his job and started a business so that he could be with me more often. He still felt guilty about what had happened. To keep me occupied, he offered me sports, which was a great charge, and I felt strong at that moment. When I turned 20, I became a professional wrestling coach. My new heart constantly demanded that I be on the move, and all these years were dedicated to active sports. I didn't care about anything else, and I have to admit that my father was really worried that I didn't have a girlfriend. He even began to think that I was not interested in them at all. Ha ha ha, but it's not. I just haven't met the right one yet. And to be honest, I wasn't sure anyone would want to be with me at all. Better to be alone, I told myself, and Rachel appeared. A heart doesn't have to be love, Call. I've always told you that. Hi, I'm almost Iron Man's girlfriend, she said, laughing. The first time I met Call, it seemed to me that he was not a man, but a machine. Then I just signed up my brother in the wrestling section. What struck me was that Call didn't even have shortness of breath after the hour-long fight. It was more than strange, and I came dozens of times and he looked anywhere but not in my direction. That was until I almost hit him with a car one day. He ran into the road so suddenly that I barely had time to slow down. Call said that he was running and had accelerated so fast that it was difficult to stop. Of course, I didn't believe him at first. So, word by word, we met. Our first date was the stupidest in the world. Call didn't know how to talk to girls at all, but it was funny. And then I found out about his story. I was scared and surprised. A comic book story, I told him. And then he showed me the full-length scar, and when I pressed my ear to his chest, I didn't hear the knocking. That's when I went into shock. Call thought I'd leave him after this. They say that meeting a man like him, and even with such scars, is not so pleasant. But no, I had already fallen in love with him. With a man without a heart. And as you understand, you can love without it. Be kind and gentle without it. If everyone were like Call's father, hundreds of thousands of lives could be saved. That's why Call and I decided to go to college and train as surgeons. I can confidently say that I was lucky to meet such a person. You don't have to be self-conscious just because you are different from others. On the contrary, we should be happy that life continues. So don't be afraid to love.